All right, everybody, welcome back. It's time for another deep dive. And this time, we're tackling a pretty meaty one, ADP 60,
Yeah,
the Army's Doctrine on Command.
that's right.
We're going to try to break it down into something that's digestible,
Yeah,
and hopefully you'll walk away, with some good takeaways.
absolutely. This is, it's a foundational document in terms of how we in the Army view command.
Right. And to help us do that, we have an expert in all things leadership and doctrine.
Happy to be here.
So one of the things that I really like about this document is that it acknowledges right up front
Yeah,
that command is personal.
absolutely.
It's not just this detached issuing of orders from some, ivory tower.
Yeah, it's about authority,
Yeah.
right? But it's also about responsibility,
Yeah.
right? And those two things are absolutely linked.
Yeah. And it's about responsibility not just for the mission, but also for the people under your command.
That's exactly right. And, and ADP 60 really emphasizes this idea that you as a commander are accountable for everything your unit does,
Right.
successes and failures.
Right. And when you think about it, it makes sense, right? Because if you're leading people,
Yeah.
you're responsible for them.
And you're responsible for creating the environment in which they can succeed.
And I think one of the things that this document really drives home is that, your character, your reputation, those things are just as important as,
Oh, absolutely.
your tactical
Yeah.
prowess.
I completely agree. The document talks about how, your character,
Yeah.
your judgment, your reputation, all of those things are absolutely critical, and they have to be cultivated over time.
Yeah, and I think we've all had those experiences where, we've had leaders who maybe weren't the best tacticians or the smartest people in the room, but they
Yeah.
genuinely cared about their soldiers.
It did.
And that made all the difference.
Absolutely. And those are the leaders that people want to follow,
Right.
right? The ones who they know have their back.
Exactly. So you've got that personal aspect. But then the document also talks about this kind of, blend of art and science when it comes to command.
Yeah, you've got the science of command,
Right.
right? The analysis of intelligence, you have planning logistics, all of that really critical stuff.
Right.
But then you've got the art of command, right? That intuition that comes from experience, that comes from, being in tough situations before and having to make those really difficult calls.
Right. So let's kind of unpack that a little bit because, you're in the field, the situation is changing, you don't have time to analyze everything.
Run a spreadsheet.
Right, exactly. What does ADP 60 say about making those gut decisions?
So ADP 60, emphasizes this idea of both analytical and intuitive decision making, right? And you have to know when to rely on which one.
So how do you cultivate that? Like, when do you know, okay, this is a gut check moment?
Well, it comes with experience, right? And it comes with understanding the situation and understanding the information that you have available to you.
So it's almost like pattern recognition in a way, right?
Yeah.
You're drawing on those past experiences.
Absolutely. And that's why, developing your judgment as a leader is so important.
And I think ADP 60 gives a really good example of this in action, and it talks about General Ridgway taking command of the 8th Army during the Korean War.
Oh, yeah. Talk about a tough situation, right?
Yeah.
Troops are retreating, morale is low, and he steps in and immediately focuses on restoring confidence, projecting strength.
Yeah, and what I find fascinating about that is it wasn't just about, drawing up a new battle plan or,
Yes.
changing the...
It was about leadership.
It was about leadership. It was about his demeanor. It was about the way he carried himself.
Exactly. And that had a tangible impact on the ground, right?
And it turned the tide of the war. I mean, his actions directly
It did.
dictated to that.
And that's a really powerful example of how, your actions as a leader, your ability to inspire those things have a real impact.
Yeah. So for all of you listeners out there, think about that. It's not just about what you say. It's about how you carry yourself, how you
show up every day.
Yeah. And the example of Ridgway really drives that home.
Absolutely. And, it ties into this idea of trust, right?
Okay.
Which is something that ADP 60 talks about a lot, this idea of building trust, not just from the top down,
Right.
but also from the bottom up, building a two-way street
Yeah.
where subordinates feel empowered to take calculated risks.
Because if you don't have that trust, if you're second-guessing yourself all the time, you're afraid to make a move without,
Micromanaging every single thing.
Right. It stifles initiative.
Absolutely.
And ADP 60 gives another really great example of this from the Vietnam War operation Hawthorne.
Yeah, Captain William Carpenter Jr., facing imminent overrun. He had to make a really tough call.
Yeah.
Air support was available, but only with napalm.
Right. So inherent dangers.
Huge risks, right?
Right.
But he trusted his judgment.
And he made that decision. He accepted the risk and ultimately saved his company.
He did. And that's an example of calculated risk taking, right?
Right. So what's the takeaway there for folks who are listening? Like, how do you balance?
Well, I think the big takeaway is that commanders need to create a climate where subordinates feel supported, even if a calculated risk doesn't pan out perfectly.
Right.
Obviously, we're not talking about, reckless endangerment here.
Right.
But we're talking about allowing for learning experiences.
Right. It's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to...
It's about learning and growing from them.
As long as you're doing it in an environment where...
In a safe environment.
Yeah, and where you're learning from it.
Exactly.
So creating that space for growth, for developing those decision-making skills, that's part of what it means to...
That's right. And that stems from trust, right?
To build trust.
If you trust your people and they trust you,
yeah,
that's when you can really start to take those risks.
And ADP 60 actually highlights another really good example of this, talking about 7 Corps and the Ruhr encirclement.
In World War II.
So what happened there?
So General J. Lawton Collins led the 7 Corps.
Yeah.
He had this incredible rapport with his staff, this deep shared understanding built over years of working together.
Right.
And this allowed him to really command with what the document calls mission orders.
So instead of dictating every single movement, every
single step,
he's giving them the objective.
And trusting them to figure out the how.
Figure out how to get it done.
And the results speak for themselves. They encircled a massive German force, captured hundreds of thousands of soldiers.
Talk about effective delegation.
Yeah, they were able to really, achieve decisive victory in that campaign.
And it wasn't just about trusting his guys, it was about empowering them.
Exactly.
To use their expertise to get the job done.
Absolutely.
Really interesting example.
And that trust, that shared understanding,
yeah,
that doesn't just happen overnight.
Right.
It takes work.
So how do you build that?
Well, ADP 60 really gets into, the nuts and bolts of how you foster that kind of command climate. And one of the key takeaways is this idea of accepting that mistakes are going to happen.
Okay, so you're not talking about, punishing every little misstep.
Right.
It's about using those moments as learning opportunity.
Exactly. Yeah. Think back to your own experiences.
Mm.
I'm sure some of your biggest growth moments came from things not going exactly according to plan.
Oh, absolutely. When you're really challenged, when you're forced to think outside the box, that's when you grow the most.
Absolutely. And if you're terrified of making a mistake, you're never going to take any risks.
Right.
And you're never going to reach your full potential as a leader.
And that goes back to that trust piece, right?
It does.
If you know that you've got that support, even if you make a mistake, that's
absolutely
huge.
That psychological safety net allows you to take those risks and to innovate, to really, push the boundaries.
It reminds me of what we were talking about earlier with General Ridgway.
Yes.
It's that
understanding that, you're not always going to get it right. But you gotta.
That's right.
You gotta trust your people and
be there to support them.
Support them, exactly.
Yeah, and ADP 60 it really emphasizes this idea of open and honest communication.
Okay.
It's not just about barking orders from a distance. It's about being present. It's about being engaged.
Walking the walk.
Exactly.
Right, not just talking the talk.
Yeah, and being willing to share in the risks. Understanding the challenges that your subordinates are facing firsthand.
And that builds credibility, too.
Right.
If they see that you're in the trenches with them, that you're...
right there with them.
Yeah.
That means something.
That's huge.
Yeah, and, this goes beyond just your immediate unit, too.
Okay.
ADP 60 talks about the need to build bridges with unified action partners, right?
So other branches, other countries.
Exactly. Because in today's world, we're rarely operating in isolation.
Right, and that can be tricky. It can be very tricky. You're dealing with different cultures, different procedures, maybe even different languages.
So how do you even start to build trust in that kind of environment?
Well, it starts with recognizing those differences
and
actively working to overcome them.
Okay.
And remembering that at the end of the day, you're all striving for that shared objective.
And that shared understanding, that's key, right?
Absolutely.
Like we were talking about with the Zeth Corps.
Exactly.
Everyone was on the same page. They understood the goal.
They knew what they were working towards.
So they were able to adapt when things got messy.
Exactly. There's that old saying, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
I like that.
And in a military context, you need to be able to do both.
Right.
You need to be able to move quickly and decisively,
Hmm.
but you also need to be able to build those strong relationships that will allow you to achieve those long-term objectives.
No, this shared understanding, you can't just like snap your fingers and it magically appears.
Yeah. No, you can't. It takes time. It takes effort.
So what's the key?
And it takes training.
Training. Okay.
And not just, going through the motions, but really building those habits of communication, of initiative, of calculated risk-taking.
So it's like creating that muscle memory
Exactly.
for decision making under pressure.
Absolutely.
But you're doing it in an environment where it's okay to make mistakes.
That's right. A controlled environment where you can learn and grow without real-world consequences.
Right. You're not waiting until the bullets are flying to figure out how to do this.
That's the time to rely on those instincts you've built up.
And ADP 6.0 talks about, after action reviews and how important those are.
Absolutely. Not just to figure out what went wrong, but also to celebrate what went right.
Okay.
And to figure out how you can do even better next time.
So it's a constant cycle of improvement.
It is a continuous process.
Kind of like what we're doing right now, breaking down ADP 6.0.
There you go.
So we've talked about the importance of trust building, that shared understanding, empowering subordinates.
Right.
What else does ADP 6.0 highlight as being essential?
Well, one thing that often gets overlooked, but is absolutely critical, is the role of our NCOs.
Okay, or non-commissioned officers.
They are the linchpins of the Army. They're the ones who bridge the gap between the commander's intent and the soldiers on the ground.
They're the ones who make things happen.
They are. And, ADP 6.0 really emphasizes that NCOs need to have that same ability to make decisions under pressure, to foster trust and understanding within their teams.
So we're not just talking about, leadership from the top down.
Right.
It's about recognizing that leadership exists at every level.
At every single level.
And that NCOs have a critical role to play.
They are absolutely essential.
In making all of this happen.
They are the backbone of the Army.
And that responsibility of developing leaders, that extends to, identifying and mentoring
Absolutely.
those who have the potential to step up.
That's right. It's about succession planning. It's about making sure that we're always developing the next generation of leaders.
So it's not enough to just lead your unit today.
Nope.
You got to be thinking about who's going to lead it tomorrow.
That's right. You've got to be setting the stage for the future.
And that means giving them opportunities to grow.
Yes.
Yeah.
Even if it means letting them make a few mistakes along the way.
Because those mistakes, those are where the real learning takes place.
Absolutely.
It's about giving them that space to stumble a little bit, to learn from those stumbles.
To get back up and dust themselves off.
And come back stronger.
Exactly, because the battlefield is not the place to be figuring these things out for the first time.
Right.
You need leaders who have been tested, who can think on their feet, who can make sound judgments under pressure.
And that brings us to another really important point that ADP 6.0 makes, and that's the need for, timely, decisive action.
You got to be able to make those calls.
Yeah, you can have the best plan in the world. But if you freeze up in the moment, if you can't adapt,
Right.
you're already behind.
You're already behind. The enemy gets a vote, we always say.
And ADP 6.0 really emphasizes how important it is for leaders to be agile, to process information quickly.
Yeah.
And make those calls even when you don't have all the information.
It goes back to that idea of trusting your gut,
Yeah.
right? That intuitive decision making.
Right.
Sometimes you just got to go with your gut.
You got to be able to make a decision with incomplete information.
Because perfect information is rarely available in combat.
And empowering your subordinates to do the same.
Exactly.
Because you can't be everywhere.
You can't micromanage everything that's happening on the battlefield.
Right.
You got to trust your people to make the right call when the time comes.
And to take those risks.
Absolutely calculated risks, though.
Right. Calculated risks.
Not just, throwing caution to the wind.
Right.
But understanding that there's always going to be some level of risk in any military operation.
Now, some folks might be thinking, okay, this is all well and good, for combat. But what about, when we're back at garrison?
Yeah.
What about, day-to-day leadership?
So ADP 6.0 is very clear about that. These principles apply just as much in peacetime as they do in war.
So it's not like you just, flip a switch and become a different person.
Yeah, you're a leader. 24/7, 365.
It's about setting that tone.
It's about who you are. It's about how you show up every single day.
Yeah, you don't just, turn it on and off.
Exactly.
So whether you're on the battlefield or you're back at base.
You're leading.
Same principles apply.
Absolutely.
And ADP 6.0 also talks about, leadership being a journey, not a destination.
Oh, absolutely. It's a continuous process of learning and growing.
So you're never really done.
Never done. Even the most experienced commanders are always looking for ways to improve.
To get better, to learn from their mistakes.
Absolutely. To seek out
Good.
feedback to mentor others.
And I think that's what we're trying to do here today with this deep dive.
Abs-
It's about, taking this document, breaking it down,
Yeah, making it digestible.
and hopefully giving you some food for thought.
Absolutely, because at the end of the day, the goal is to become more effective leaders, right?
So as we kind of wrap things up here, what's the key takeaway
Yeah.
you want folks to walk away with?
I think the key takeaway is that command is about people. It's about understanding the weight of responsibility that you carry for your soldiers' well-being, for their development, and for their ability to accomplish the mission. And it's about building that environment of trust and empowerment that allows them to thrive.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
When you get those things right, the tactical and the strategic stuff, it all kind of falls into place.
You take care of your people, they'll take care of the mission.
Exactly.
Now, ADP 6.0 talks a lot about building those strong bonds within a unit, but it also touches on something we talked about earlier, building bridges with unified action partners, people who might not wear the same uniform or even speak the same language as you.
Right. In today's complex world, that's more important than ever.
So here's something for you to think about. How can you, as a leader, apply these same principles of trust building and shared understanding when working with partners from different backgrounds, cultures, military traditions?
It's a tough question.
It's a critical question.
It is because, in today's world, we can't go it alone. We have to be able to work together.
Absolutely.
And to do that effectively, we need to build trust. We need to establish those shared understandings.
Well said.
And we need to be able to overcome those differences that might otherwise divide us.
I think that's a perfect note to end on.
I agree.
Well, that wraps up our deep dive into ADP 6.0. Huge thanks to our expert for joining us today.
My pleasure. Always enjoy a good deep dive.
And to all our listeners out there, thanks for joining us until next time. Keep learning, keep leading, and keep striving for excellence in all that you do.